Hello, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Today I was going to film a little bit of historic, but a big announcement came out and I kind of want to do a reaction video because I've never done one before and I've heard they're really good low effort content to get through. So I'm going to try this. Basically, it's an hour and a half Twitch stream and I'm going to cut it down. I'm going to chop out all the points that I think are unnecessary and then leave in the stuff that's relevant, cut it down to maybe 30 or 40 minutes. We'll see how long it ends up being. Hopefully it's a little bit more digestible for those people that are a little busier, and I'll give my take on some of these things. Big changes coming, especially to historic, which is what I primarily play. So going to get this started and see how it goes.
So let's just start out. Let's talk about what is Alchemy, and then we'll dive into what that means for you, what that means for the game, and all of that jazz. So we've got a handy little graphic that'll list all the things Alchemy is.
So basically, it seems like Alchemy is going to divide Standard into two kind of formats. You're going to have the standard paper format and you're going to have the Alchemy format, which is going to be the live format. The paper format is going to be just as it is in paper, and then Alchemy is going to be the one that's going to have rebalanced cards, digital only mechanics. Sure. Simple as that.
So what we're going to talk through today is as we talk through the format. So as you can see at the bottom, we have a section on rebalanced cards. So there are 11 cards that are being rebalanced. So these are existing cards in Standard that are going to be rebalanced for the Alchemy format. We'll talk a little bit more about how that works in that section. And then you heard Dave right. There are 63 new cards these are digital only cards, much like they were in Jumpstart Historic Horizons, that will be released with Alchemy on December 9th. That will be legal in the Alchemy format and in Historic. We're not revealing all 63 today. We're going to do about 10, and then there's previews over the next few days up through Tuesday that some people in the community will be doing.
So that's a pretty big part of that. 63 new cards going to be injected into Alchemy and Historic. So we're going to be getting basically a whole new, not a full set, but it's going to be pretty significant. It's like a half set. It's a lot bigger than the little releases that they do, the anthologies, and then also rebalancing 11 cards with Standard in mind. That's probably going to be my first concern, is that I like the idea of buffs and nerfs. I think it's fantastic. I think it's something that they should be embracing for Historic. I got into Historic with the intention, or with the knowledge, that it's going to be one of those formats that's going to be constantly changing. They're going to be able to tweak cards here and there because it is a digital only format. There's no paper for that. So that's what they should be doing. It'll make it interesting. It'll keep it healthy, hopefully. But when they're tweaking cards, nerfing them and buffing them with Standard primarily in mind, that's when we're going to get into some issues. And I think that might be one of my big concerns going into those 11 cards that they're changing. But it is interesting. So 74 new kind of cards, or at least change cards for Alchemy, which I'm not too interested in Alchemy because it's still Standard, just a different variant of it. But for Historic, it could change a lot of things for Historic.
So let's start by talking about the rebalanced cards, because this is going to be the familiar stuff to a lot of people. So let's start with the big one. One of the biggest players in Standard right now is Esika's Chariot. So a couple things we're going to point out on this one. One, up at the top right by the name, you see that little stylized A. That
Looks
is the
okay.
indicator that this is
Pretty
the
clear.
rebalanced.
Looks like they're also
Alchemy
changing this down
version
here.
of this card. The difference between these two is that the Alchemy version of Esika's Chariot, when it enters the battlefield, creates exactly one cat, and then it crews for 2. So it's a bit of a different experience. So
this one, I could definitely see this for Standard. I know Esika's Chariot's pretty great on the top end in like mono green decks, and then it's also just a strong card overall. Making 2 cats can be an issue. As far as Historic's concerned, you don't really see Esika's Chariot ever being played, so they're just taking a card that saw fringe play and nerfing it. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Crew 2, having a 4/4 that creates tokens, copies of tokens with Crew 2, actually might be stronger in some cases. So I like this change because it actually might take this card that was really not seeing any Historic play and make it a little bit more relevant in some other niche decks. This change I don't mind. I like this one.
Let's look at one of the next rebalances, another card that's not going to be a surprise to anyone, Goldspan Dragon. So Goldspan Dragon, the difference is that The Alchemy version will only create a treasure when it attacks, not when it becomes the target of a spell.
This is a fine change. Goldspan Dragon was way overtuned, I think, especially for standard, and making it when it enters, well, not when it enters, it's going to attack. It has haste, so probably coming down for 5, making the treasure token on attack, dealing 4 damage, and still being able to hold up some protection, but not a ton of protection is good. I always hated the fact that you could target Goldspan Dragon with like a Heartless Act or whatever other removal spell you have. It creates the mana to protect itself from that. It always felt bad, so I think this is a much better change. You can react on the attack or before attack, take it out. Yeah, overall, much more balanced and still definitely playable.
All right, let's take a look at the next card. Another card that's going to come as no surprise, Alrund's Epiphany. This one got a few more tweaks. You'll note the foretell cost has gone up, so you no longer get a discount for foretelling it. But the bigger tweak is if this spell was foretold, create 2 1/1 blue bird tokens with flying. So
this is really good. You can't chain it together anymore. I like this change. It's still powerful, but not going to be nearly as obnoxious as it was previously.
A couple things to point out. One, if you copy Alrund's Epiphany, that copy was not foretold. It won't make the birds. And if you cast this directly from your hand, of course, it will not make the birds. Next up, we have a card that is omnipresent in mono-colored aggressive decks, Faceless Haven. This was a slight tweak. It was a 4/3. It's now a 3/3 in the Alchemy format. Dave.
Not a big deal.
Right, so here, Faceless Haven's just a big part of mono-white and mono-green aggressive decks in particular, as well as some other decks in standard. Right, so the thought here is in Alchemy that this creature land's going to just be putting a little bit less pressure on people, that there are a wider range of creatures that can block this. The games aren't going to close out just quite as fast as they are with some of the other decks in the format, just to give a little bit more breathing room and to open up avenues for some of the other creature-centric decks to be more competitive players in the metagame. Like we do have stuff like vampires and zombies and all sorts of other stuff that are somewhat competitive, but potentially those 2-color decks fall a little bit short of not having a land quite as fast at doing things as this land.
This one is the first one I'm seeing that's actually going to affect Historic ever so slightly. I like playing a lot of tribal decks. Faceless Haven is going to go into basically every mono-colored tribal deck that I can throw together, with the exception of maybe goblins. But like mono-black vampires, the first one that comes to mind. It kind of sucks that it's getting nerfed down to a 4/3, but at least it still has vigilance. I think leaving it as a 4/3 and removing vigilance might have been a slightly better change, in my opinion, because that vigilance is pretty important. You can attack in, and then if you have 1 or 2 other mana open, you can still cast a pretty relevant thing, get that damage in. So yeah, I don't know. I think the vigilance is what makes this card ever so slightly more annoying for me, and the fact that it's changeling essentially. Yeah, 3/3, still going to be relevant, still going to be a really good card to play in pretty much any mono black snow land-based tribal deck.
All right. Next up is a big one, Omnath, Locus of Creation. So
look who's back.
Card in this list that is currently banned in Standard and Historic. A couple tweaks here. It costs an additional mana up front, and then when it enters the battlefield, rather than drawing a card, it scries 1. So Dave, let's start with you first on what the goals were with this card.
Omnath was basically recouping its mana cost and recouping the card itself with the card draw initially. So we were trying to decrease how much it was sort of just, covering its own costs. Like, everything was coming back. You're getting your mana and the card right back. So we took that approach with the card. We're very curious to see how it will play out again, where you're not, it costs 1 more mana, so you're not getting all your mana back. It's coming back, it's entering the game a little bit later. You're getting sort of card selection rather than immediate card replacement.
My prediction for this one is that in Historic, people are going to go back to building 4-color or 5-color elementals, probably 4-color elementals, and it's going to be just as powerful as it was before. Sure, you don't get that card draw when it enters the battlefield, but the landfall abilities are still bonkers. 5 mana versus 4 mana on cast is not a big deal. It still has 4 toughness. 4 toughness is that sweet spot. If they nerf the toughness down to 3, maybe that would make things a little bit different. But you're going to have very specific removal to get rid of this on the turn that it comes down. And then if they have landfall, if they have Fabled Passages, for example, it's going to get out of control. So I suspect Omnath is going to be played. Is it going to be too powerful? I'm not sure. It was banned quite some time ago, and we've received a lot of new cards in Historic since then. The metagame has certainly changed a lot since Omnath. In fact, I don't even remember playing against Omnath much because I think it was a little bit before I got serious about Historic. I think it's still going to be a very good card, and it might, birth a new deck, and that'll be really cool to see more decks being played in Historic. Hopefully, it doesn't slot really well into 5-color Niv Mizzet. That's my biggest concern with it right now, because I'm so tired of Niv Mizzet. I don't want it to get any stronger.
Okay. And all of these formats are going to exist together. You're not adding Alchemy and removing something else, right?
Nope. It's more. Nothing is being taken away or removed. We're just adding another option for people who are excited about that option. Great. If you're not, the standard queue is right where you left it.
So this might be where one of my biggest concerns comes from, is fracturing the player base. Magic is already a very fractured game. There are so many different ways to play it, which is one of the reasons why I actually love the game. When you get tired of one style of play, you can always go and do something else. I used to play a lot of Modern, and then when I got tired of doing that stuff or playing on MTGO, I always had EDH to fall back on with my EDH group on Sundays. That was always a really good thing because the formats felt so different. But now we're getting a lot of formats that are very similar. We have Standard, Historic, Brawl, and Draft. Now, they're not all similar, but those are ways to play. We have best of 1 and best of 3 formats for a lot of those formats. And now we're going to have Alchemy, probably Alchemy best of 1 and probably Alchemy best of 3. That's another fracture going into the game. And I don't like seeing the player base so divided. That's a concern I have. I'm not sure how people are going to flock to Alchemy. Personally, I don't play paper Magic anymore. And the reason I used to play Magic on MTGO was to prepare for my weekend tournaments when I did play paper Magic. But now that I'm only a digital player since COVID happened, I'm not so interested in those paper formats, but they still need to exist. So they're in kind of a tight spot. I don't really know what an elegant solution would be to doing this, because I think embracing the idea of always being online, having a digital style of the game where you can update things continuously without impacting that paper version of the game, it's really important. It's really a neat design space, but they have to be really careful with dividing the community a little bit too much. As for me, if I ever did get back into Standard, I don't think I would ever look at paper Standard again. I think now that Alchemy's there, I would immediately go into Alchemy. And
great. Okay, we still have a couple more rebalances to get through, plus previews of the Alchemy sets. We've got one more card that has arguably been made a little bit worse, and then we've got 5 cards that look to have been made a little bit better. So let's continue with the rebalances. Next up is Luminarch Aspirant. The main difference here is that the +1/+1 counter gets put on the creature at the beginning of the end step in the Alchemy version rather than the beginning of combat.
this one's a little rough for Historic because Luminarch Aspirant wasn't exactly a powerhouse in the format. I understand it has a big impact on Standard, and it probably needed to be changed to slow down mono white. As far as Historic's concerned, I do play this card in Historic. I do like my Luminarch Aspirant quite a bit. I do like +1/+1 counters. It's not a big deal. I know this one's going to bother a lot of people. I can already see this one being controversial, but it's still playable. Still plenty good. At the end step, it's fine. You're just missing out on that initial combat. If they had removal for it anyways, you weren't getting that +1/+1 counter. This is effectively just stopping a little bit more damage that it would do over the course of the game. It's not a huge thing.
All right.
Maybe. I don't know.
Let's look at some of the cards that were improved.
Yes,
Next
let's see
up
some
is
buffs.
A card that's been kind of a cute favorite of mine, I know, but it hasn't really seen any play because it wasn't really good enough, but it got a little bit of a boost. Let's see Cosmos Elixir. The main difference between these is if you gain the 2 life instead of drawing a card, you also get to scry 1.
With this card and a lot of the others, it's not necessarily that we're like, this is the change that we need to make to this is going to be top tier deck or anything like that. This is just, these are some fun cards people are playing with. If they become more competitive, that's great.
Mostly irrelevant, completely irrelevant for Historic Constructed, but pretty cool change for Historic Brawl, because I think Cosmo Elixir is a really cool card for Brawl, and getting a little bit of a buff is great. This is one I want to see more of. Cards that were a little bit too outside the playability realm, getting a little bit better so that they can see fringe play in Historic or more Brawl play. I'm happy about that.
Well, let's look at the next of these cards, Druid Class. I know I've played this card in a number of my Brawl decks. So the biggest change here, the only change here, is that the cost for level 3 when you make the land creature has been reduced from 5 to 3.
Nobody cares about level 3. It's only level 1 and level 2.
Class, Wizard Class. The difference here is, again, that level 3 cost is reduced.
I like this one better than the Druid Class change. I think Wizard Class actually has a lot of potential to create some pretty cool play patterns, especially in Historic Brawl. And that third ability is a lot more relevant than the Druid Class's level 3. So, yeah, I like this one.
Sure. All right.
Time to build Wizard Class.
Up, a big splashy card that hasn't quite hit as well. Phylath World Sculptor. A couple tweaks. Phylath itself gets Trample.
Okay.
And then additionally, the Landfall ability not only puts 4+1/+1 counters on the plant, but it also gives the plant Trample as well.
It should trample.
Yeah, so right, without basically on this one, by giving it trample, we felt like it gave it a room that maybe some other cards in the environment wouldn't necessarily do. I mean, we do have like some other strong 6-drops, including like, you know, a new werewolf and such. Right, by giving trample, maybe this gives us a place that maybe lets people re-explore the landfall mechanic in general, which was, you know, something that people were excited about, and just right with both some of the new cards we'll see and with some of the rebalancing, we were certainly looking like, you know, what are some of the old mechanics from last year or this year, even to the extent that we could figure it out, that like, you know, what could maybe use a little help, what could, you know, maybe reinvigorate some interest in that mechanic or set of mechanics.
Mm-hmm. All right. And the last rebalance, another personal favorite of mine, Demilich. Slight improvement. It was a 4/3. It's now a 4/4. Dave, what is that toughness boost going to do?
That toughness boost, I've always said, is so huge. Going from 3 to 4 is massive. And recently, Zan Said played Demilich in his Arc-like Phoenix Izzet deck. So that deck getting a little bit stronger? Ooh, boy. All right, yeah. I'm happy about this one because I think Demilich is a really neat card and it deserves to see more play. Being 4 toughness, I think, is very relevant for Historic Constructed.
I think it largely makes the deck more worth trying to build around, or make the card more worth trying to build a deck around. I mean, this is actually a rather competitive card.
Absolutely.
But we felt like that here there was still room, especially in Standard, to give it a 4th toughness, just to work around more.
Dying to Frostbite would feel real bad if you had a Demilich. Now it doesn't die to that. They need to put a lot more effort into getting it off the field in Standard. And the same in Historic. 3 damage direct spells are a lot more common than 4 damage creature spells.
More removal cards to largely make it worth exploring that deck more.
Creature removal spells.
All right. So that covers all the rebalanced cards.
Okay.
We're now going to...
So overall, the rebalances, I think, are pretty cool. Again, they're rebalancing everything in mind of Standard, and that kind of sucks because Standard is their focus, and Historic is just kind of getting hit on the side, inadvertently. That could have a lot of really bad effects in the future. We'll just have to wait and see. But for now, I think the nerfs that they just went over are not going to affect Historic too badly, other than making some people a little annoyed. The buffs also are not going to affect anything. The only one is the Demilich. Everything else was pretty much oriented for Historic Brawl, and buffing things in Historic Brawl to see more playability is always going to be a good thing, I think. So I'm not too annoyed. I think it's really good. That's what I want to see in Historic, is buffs and changes. But I do want to see them maybe do some buffs and nerfs with Historic in mind rather than only Standard in mind going forward. They're going to have to be really careful with what they do.
We're going to spend some time. We're going to preview about 10 cards. And these are all digital mechanic focused cards. completely new. They'll be released with Alchemy on the 9th. That full list is 63 cards. Ian, is it normally going to be 63 cards with each of these releases?
It will not be 63 cards going forward. This first set is doing the work of being both sort of the VOW set and integrating cards from the entire standard year leading up to VOW. Going forward, you'll be looking at more like 30 cards, somewhere in that range for each new Alchemy release. Although I would say that the types of cards are aimed at a pretty similar space. Like these are usually some pretty exciting cards and fun stuff. Yeah, it'll be 63 for this one, and then every other set will just be 30 cards associated with the premiere set that they come out alongside. So,
So when they release Kamigawa next year, at the start of next year, they're going to release standard Kamigawa and then Alchemy Kamigawa, and that's going to have like 30 Kamigawa focus cards that are only Alchemy cards. Yeah, that's not going to get confusing for standard paper players.
Starting
it's going to be weird.
Our next set, it'll be
30. Yeah,
okay, so these cards are sort of themed after, typically they'll be themed after the set they're coming out immediately after, but this particular drop of Alchemy cards is going to have stuff from kind of the full previous year.
I'd say it skews Innistrad, but has stuff for the entire year.
I bring that up because our first one is called Toralf's Disciple. Toralf is a character
Look at this
from
thing.
Kaldheim back then, but this is a pretty powerful card. So we have a 3/3 for 2
I don't like
human
this
warrior
right
with
here.
haste.
Rare.
Whenever Toralf's Disciple attacks, conjure 4 cards named Lightning Bolt into your library, then shuffle. So Ian, we've seen Conjure before, but remind people what Conjure is.
So Conjure is something that we can do in digital where we make full-on, non-token, real cards from nothing, and then put them somewhere. I believe this is the first card we're seeing where the cards that are conjured are shuffled into your library rather than going into your hand or on the battlefield. So yeah, this is basically a card that each time it attacks, it starts stuffing your deck with lightning bolts.
All right.
Oh my gosh, whenever Toralf's Disciple attacks, conjure 4 cards named Lightning Bolt. This is so insane. I really wonder how this is going to work. You are going to be jamming cards into your library, and that's never a really good thing because suddenly you're going to be flooding your deck. But you are putting Lightning Bolts in there. Lightning Bolt is amazing. Do I want to be playing this in mono red burn in Historic? Maybe. 4 copies? Just get all kinds of Lightning Bolts and try to end the game that way? Oh, this card is really interesting to me. What a big change. I have no idea how to evaluate this card. It's so weird. Imagine it attacks twice. It's putting 8 lightning bolts into your deck. That's cluttering it up so much. If you ever played like a deck building game, adding cards to your deck is what you need to do, but it's not always the best thing that you want to be doing, especially if you can't be taking out lands. That'd be pretty busted, right? Replace 4 lands with 4 lightning bolts. Now we're getting into board game realms. Neat.
And Ian, I did see a question in chat that I think is really pertinent before we dive too far into these. How will people acquire these cards?
Okay.
So these cards are available in special booster packs that are the Alchemy booster packs. The Alchemy booster packs have the same sort of duplicate protection that we normally have and are tied to the set that they're associated with. So this one is associated with VOW. Once you've collected all of the rares from this, you start getting rares from VOW to replace those slots. Once you get all the mythics from this, you get mythics from VOW, and then once you've churned through both, then you would go back to getting gems. They are also available for wild cards at the normal rate.
Of course.
All right.
I wonder how that's going to work. So they're going to be adding another booster pack. It's going to be Crimson Vow Alchemy booster. Why not just, so I guess you just buy Alchemy boosters, right? Why wouldn't you? If you're only playing the digital formats? Historic?
Next up, we have one of my favorite cards in this new drop. So Absorb Energy. It's an instant for 1 a blue and a blue. Counter target spell. Cards in your hand that share a card type with that spell perpetually gain. This spell costs 1 less to cast. Ian, tell us about perpetually.
What a counterspell.
So perpetually does a couple fun things. One of the most important things it does, really, when it comes down to the rules of Magic, is it lets us change a card in your hand and have that change survive the card changing zones. Normally in Magic, it's a very firm rule that when a card changes zones, it's becoming new objects, and things that you've done to it in hand don't last to the battlefield. This also lets us change a card without your opponent having seen it. They don't need to see, there's no reveal and say, yep, that's the one that I'm going to be able to cast more cheaply. This keeps that hidden information hidden.
This one I'm having a hard time nailing down too. I think I like the unpredictability-ness of this card because you don't really know if you'll be able, let's say you have a handful of sorceries, you don't know if you'll be able to counter a sorcery to give all your sorceries cost reduction of 1. But in those games when it works out, it's going to be fantastic. I think this card is going to see some crazy historic play. And as far as standard or alchemy play goes, probably why wouldn't it's a really, really, really good cancel. Still powerful though. 3 might be a little bit too low. Maybe it should have been 4 mana.
Another card that says perpetually.
We'll see how strong it is.
Begin anew. This one's pretty splashy for a green
Look at that
and
art.
a white. You get a sorcery that says destroy all creatures. So it's another 4 mana wrath. Creature cards in your hand perpetually get +1/+1.
So
Dave,
weird.
Tell us about this card.
Right. So this is sort of the the 4 mana wrath, sort of the what can be certainly a big staple in a format. I mean, we put this in green and white, which are colors that don't necessarily want to avoid playing with creatures. So we've tried to make this appealing and enticing, other than just a control deck, by putting some of the power in the card to making you want to play a lot of creatures yourself, or play at least some number of creatures to gain the benefits of the other stuff, right? That all your stuff's going to get bigger. So it's more about whether this is sideboard card or something main deck that you can generate a lot of value and trying to time this the best.
Get ready. This is not a creature-oriented deck. You better believe that this is going to be a problem within a couple of weeks in Alchemy, especially. It's a 4 mana wrath that is it's not a creature wrath. It's going to be in a control deck. And even if that player gets 1 card with +1/+1, that's great. But it's still a 4 mana wrath. It's going to, the cost is pretty prohibitive. 2 green is bad, but I think the mana base in standard is probably going to be enough to support it. And this might see some play in historic. It might be interesting because green not seeing obviously play in a lot of control decks with Jeskai being the way it is, but it'll slot into Niv Mizzet very nicely. Oh boy, I do not like this card. Yeah, this is bonkers for Niv Mizzet, right? Oh, okay. Here we go. They're pushing. Also, notice another rare. I'm pretty sure all the cards so far have been rares. Ooh, gonna be expensive.
Mm-hmm. All right, next up, we have Ishkanah Broodmother, which has a new keyword on it. For 3 and a green, you get a legendary creature spider. We've seen other version of Ishkanah before. This is a 3/5. It's got reach, of course. It says other spiders you control get +1/+2, and then it has an activated ability for 1 and either a black or a green. Exile 2 cards from your graveyard. Draft a card from Ishkanah Broodmother's spellbook.
This is cool. This is just going to be a historic brawl card. I like this right here. You can make Ishkanah your commander. You can have a legendary spider commander. I love it. Yes, this is cool. I want to see more of this because more historic brawl stuff is going to be awesome because it's a fun format. I've been playing it all weekend. It's great.
All right, Ian, what does draft mean?
So draft is a mechanic that leverages Conjure. When you draft, it's very similar to what we did with the Davriel in Jumpstart Historic Horizons, where you are given 3 options from a larger list, and you choose one. And in the case of draft cards, by default, if it doesn't say anything else, that card then goes to your hand. Like Davriel, each time you draft, you're drafting from the full list. There's no chipping away at the list until you've only got 1 card left. And yeah, it's randomized each time which of the three you get to choose between.
It's a Hearthstone
All
mechanic, right?
We've got
think so.
Ishkanah's spellbook here, and you may notice a theme. It's got some spiders. So, Dave, how did you end up with this for Ishkanah's spellbook?
Right. So I think one of the things I'm most excited about this is just this is an entirely novel like game design space for digital TCGs, but like I do feel like we're able to do very cool stuff here, especially because we have such a large history and catalog of Magic cards that like I think we can do very flavorful stuff where like, oh, the spell book of this is like we have enough spiders in Magic or spider related things, right? Like the Prey Upon uses art with a spider on it. So yeah, it's it's kind of fun in terms of just like thematically there's resonance there. But yeah, then you just get a lot of variety. It's kind of fun to be playing with some of these cards that aren't what you'd normally expect to see on a a constructed battlefield. But that just might be appropriate if you need a 5-drop or you need a way to boost your creature with a Arachnoform or whatever else. So like it creates some very novel play patterns, and like each game you're going to be choosing, like when you use this you're going to be choosing from 3 of these 15, so what you're choosing is going to be different. And again, as with many of the goals here, it's allowing for a variety of gameplay from experience to experience, beyond what you'd normally just put in your 60 or 60 plus card deck.
All right, so the spell book is just going to have a whole bunch of cool spider cards. Yeah, I like this card a lot. 3/5 for 4 reach that maybe has some card advantage. I think it might see Alchemy play. That's pretty cool. But I'm mostly excited about this for Historic Brawl. Again, the spellbook's cool. Not strong cards, but they're thematic. It's gonna be it's a fun card. It's awesome.
All right. Next up, we have another familiar legend associated with Innistrad. We have Gitrog, Horror of Zhava. So this has a lot of words on it. Let's get going.
It killed the art.
2, a black and a green for a 6/6 legendary creature,
Wow.
Frog Horror. It has Menace, and at the beginning of each combat, if it is untapped, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If they do tap it, then seek a land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it perpetually gains black-green, sacrifice this land, draw a card.
This thing's insane. This thing's definitely going to see Alchemy played to some capacity. I think it's a 6/6 for 4 with a great keyword, and then it's going to ramp and remove creatures from the opponent. This thing's insane. This thing is so pushed.
All right, we've got one more legend. This one may be a bit more obscure to people, but will nonetheless be recognizable. It's also pretty powerful. Captain Eberhart is a 2-mana, 1 and a white, 1/1 human soldier with double strike that says spells cast from among cards you drew this turn cost 1 less to cast. Spells cast from among cards your opponent drew this turn cost 1 more to cast.
I have no idea who Captain Eberhart is, but yeah, this is a cool card. Will it see historic play in humans? Maybe as a 1 or 2 of. Could be cool. Double strike is pretty huge, and giving a discount on cards is always big, but it is random, and it also taxes. Yeah, I think this will see a home somewhere and in some capacity in Selesnya humans for sure.
Next up, we have a pretty cool card, if I do say so myself. Something we've never seen before, Patient Zero. So Patient Zero is 1 and a black for a 2/2 lifelink zombie. Nothing special there so far, but the ability says damage isn't removed from creatures your opponents control during cleanup steps.
Right, it can definitely change the way you'd want it to change the way the games play. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what other stuff you couple with this, kind of having persistent damage. What is persistent damage in Magic like? Yeah, it's kind of a cool concept.
Kind of wish this were a symmetrical effect. Damage isn't removed from creatures during cleanup steps. I think it would make it a little bit more interesting, certainly a lot less powerful. But yeah, it's basically putting -0, -1 counters on your opponent's things. That's going to be very powerful. It's going to be very new to the game of Magic. It's going to be hard to keep track of. I don't know if I like them changing such a big fundamental aspect of Magic. I remember when I first got into Hearthstone years ago, when it first came out, I thought it was really interesting that damage stayed on the creatures, and that was cool for Hearthstone. But then when I got back into Magic, or I started playing Magic more seriously, I definitely appreciated that difference between damage staying and damage not staying. And I think I definitely prefer damage not staying because it adds a bigger depth to the game. This, though, you're definitely breaking some ideas I have about the game, and I don't know. I think it's really cool. Love the card, but boy, oh boy, is this thing going to be unique.
Yeah.
It's different than Wither.
Next up, we have Forsaken Crossroads, a cool land. So
Beautiful
when
art.
it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped, sort of. As Forsaken Crossroads enters the battlefield, choose a color. When Forsaken Crossroads enters the battlefield, scry 1. If you weren't the starting player, you may untap Forsaken Crossroads
That's
instead.
awesome. This is a great card.
You can add 1 mana of the chosen color. Dave, tell us about this card.
Yeah, the genesis of this comes like, right, I've certainly been to many events. I hear all the ways in like which people will like maybe lament like, oh, I wish this was a little bit different, or that we could somehow address an issue and somewhere in Magic. One of the things that comes up a fair bit is that there, especially at least in some metagames, there can be a pretty big, I guess I'd call like a polarity. There's a big difference whether you're on the play or the draw.
Absolutely.
This is especially true, the more aggro format maybe is. Where, right, if you're on the play, your win percentage is higher than it is on the draw. I think in some ways that's healthy, but sometimes that difference can get larger than we think is ideal. So it's things like that. I'm like, oh, well, now we're doing digital only designs. How can I, like, is there a way to tackle that in digital? And right, like I what makes a digital only design is kind of a murky area. Like this card could exist in paper, but it's a thing to track. Like how well are you going to remember who was on the player draw any given game, unless you're writing that down. And maybe as a one-off, that's fine. A one-off mechanic, that's fine. But like sort of cumulatively, if we made a lot of cards like these, it would be a lot of tracking for paper.
Nobody would be able to track this in paper. People would say, oh, it's super easy to track it in paper. It's no problem. We could definitely play this in paper. No, you couldn't. How many times have you played Paper Magic and you have the land in your hand and you look up at your opponent and you say, did I play a land this turn yet? Your turn just started and you have no idea if you played a land or not this turn. It's constant. Nobody would be able to keep track of who went first. You'd be sitting there looking at your notepad, going over damage, trying to figure out lands. I did this on turn. No. Something like this, people can't keep track of.
Whereas in digital can just kind of handle this for you. So
Love it.
A lot of the genesis was like, oh, look, how can I make a card that sort of balances the play draw disparity? And that's what led to this. Like they're, in this set, this is, I think, the only card that mentions this. And so a lot of it, like, I didn't want to make like 10 cards that were caring about play draw. Like especially for this first offering, I was trying to explore the space, let people tell us what they liked and what they didn't like, and then we can make more of those. Right? This is like, if I'm going to try to make a dent in this play draw thing, the best place to do it, I felt, was like on a land. So right on a land, it's going to be really easy to get into decks. Right, that in itself can make a pretty big difference to have something that's kind of like vaguely playing in like kind of a fabled passage sort of power level. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to see where this goes. Right, I mean, it is tricky in that this goes in multicolor decks, and some of the play draw stuff happens the most maybe in monocolor decks. But I think, yeah, again, with a lot of this, I think we'll learn a ton from cards like this.
All right,
I agree. I would like to see more exploration of this. Not too much, of course. You don't want so many cards that are going to be dependent on that, but I do like seeing a handful of them. And like he said, seeing what this card tells them after a couple of months, yeah, could be interesting to see where this concept goes, because there is a huge problem with on the play and on the draw, and especially if you are a best of one player, it's tremendously important. As a best of three primarily player, it's not such a big deal because you can always try to come back with sideboarding choices in game 2 and game 3. But overall, I think being on the play in game 1 does give you enough of an advantage that they do need some cards somewhere in the game that could help smooth out that overall advantage. The concern, though, is does something like Forsaken Crossroads just become an auto-include in every deck? Do you just play 4 Forsaken Crossroads in every multicolor deck going forward now because the possibility of you being on the play or on the draw is always going to be relevant? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe the mana bases are just good enough that you don't have to worry about it too much and you won't put this in, but yeah, I don't know. I'm going to be interested to see how this one actually ends up playing out in practice. Looking at it, I think it's super cool. It might not be as necessary or as useful as I initially think, and it might just kind of fall flat. And then it might go the complete other way, and it's just an auto-include in the majority of decks.
Next up, we have a card called Geistchanneler. Geistchanneler is a 1/3 for 1 and a blue human wizard. When Geistchanneler enters the battlefield, choose an instant or sorcery card in your hand with mana value 3 or greater. It perpetually gains. This spell costs 2 less to cast. Dave.
Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of a fun use of perpetual. In terms of speaking of the earlier question about FFL, I guarantee you I didn't write mana value 3 or greater on this card when I designed it. So right, again, a lot of this stuff is coming out of people playtesting and realizing you can double spell or whatever in ways that are problematic. So yeah, this card's cool. Fortunately,
it is a wizard. It does work with Harmonic Prodigy. Discount of 4.
have nerfed Alrund's Epiphany, or maybe this would be more of a problem.
Our last card here, Ominous Traveler. So Ominous Traveler is 2 mana for a 1/1 human creature. When Ominous Traveler enters the battlefield, draft a card from Ominous Traveler's spellbook. The card perpetually gains. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast the spell. And when you cast this spell, return a creature named Ominous Traveler you control to its owner's hand.
Certainly, well, we can go to the spellbook here, but yeah, the spellbook's pretty much a mix of various Innistrad creature type, the main tribal types.
It's all over the place.
Many of which care about others of themselves. So, it's pretty powerful if you can keep it going in terms of doing this over and over. Not exactly sure what deck it'll end up in, but the hope was that it could mix into decks that are trying to build the tribals type and either trying to get the cards that match their tribe, or maybe you end up with kind of a silly mix of hodgepodge that is effective if you can keep this going.
There's no way this is going in any kind of tribal deck. It's way too sporadic and random. You can't do that in any kind of consistency or with any kind of consistency. Yeah, this is a really weird card. It probably could be fun. I don't think it's that powerful. This is probably one of the weakest ones of the bunch, but it is very neat.
Chat's going a million miles a minute. I'm going to try to get through some questions. I saw this question a couple different places. I think we answered it earlier, but let's go over it again. Ian, how will you acquire Alchemy cards?
Alchemy cards will be acquired pretty much the exact same way things do normally. About a month after a set comes out, there will be an Alchemy variant of the booster pack for that set that adds Alchemy cards and as your rares and mythics most of the time. If you have more of those than there were rares and mythics, you start getting rares and mythics from that set that you haven't yet collected. It will also be available with wild cards and acquisition just the same as we normally can. There's also going to be, just as a kickoff for the format, everybody gets a pretty big pile of Alchemy cards to get things started.
Okay.
Hopefully they give us some of these good rares and mythics as a kickoff to the Alchemy format. I'm concerned about right there. That's a big concern. So what I was thinking is they release Kamigawa. They're going to release Kamigawa Alchemy at the same time. And if you are an Alchemy player, you buy the Alchemy packs before you would buy any of the regular Kamigawa packs. That would make sense. But now they're saying you can acquire the Alchemy packs 1 month after the set releases. That's a huge problem for me. That's not cool, Wizards, at all. That means if you want to play Kamigawa at the start of the season, when it first comes out, you have to buy Kamigawa packs, and then you have to wait a month later to dip into these new 30 card packs or whatever they're going to be to get the Alchemy versions of the cards. I don't mind putting money. Personally, I put money into Magic. Obviously, I buy a lot of cards. I have a lot of card styles. I don't mind it. I play a lot of Magic. Magic's my main hobby. Every 3 months, putting some money into Magic is fine for me because it is my main hobby. If they're going after my money every month with forced products, not forced products, nothing's forced. I shouldn't say forced products. With putting out more products than necessary, flooding their store with more packs, I don't know how cool I am with that. Yeah, gonna have to see how it's handled and the price. I'm sure the price is gonna be exactly the same. It's gonna be like 200 gems per pack or 1,000 gold per pack. Of course, it's gonna be that. But you can't draft it. So the only way to do it is to get packs. And they're also going to be putting out probably historic jumpstart stuff. They're probably also going to keep putting out anthologies. So are they aiming to make Arena a monthly thing where they expect people to keep putting money in constantly every 3 or 4 weeks? Goodness, this is some greedy stuff. And I don't think that's good for the format. I think rebalancing cards, nerfing cards, buffing them, all very good for the health of the game. Overall, creating a good metagame is going to be the best thing to keep this game alive. But the economy is where this game's going to die. And if they're fueled by greed at the top end and putting out too many products, product fatigue is a very real thing. It happened to me back in like 2017 or 18 when they started putting out all these mastery sets in between the regular sets. I was playing standard at that time. I just couldn't keep up with it. That's what I'm kind of feeling with what he just said there. That's concerning. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. I hope you made it to this point in the video because that is one of the more relevant things that has been said.
What is sort of the philosophy between like choosing to rebalance a card and then versus choosing to ban a card when you're talking standard Alchemy area?
I mean, where possible, we're going to look to rebalance cards. I think we've discussed how there are some cases if a card's iconic, like say we have like done a reprint in a set and it's a card that would somehow be problematic. Like, yeah, we don't want to like rebalance Lightning Bolt or whatever. Lightning Bolt's Lightning Bolt. Like we're not going to make do some variant of that, right? Some stuff's just too iconic to rebalance, in our opinions. Right? There's no obvious line on some of that stuff, but I think where possible, we're going to look to rebalance cards so that cards we make and cards you own, you can keep playing in the formats where they're legal.
Okay,
that's going to make a lot of people probably upset a little bit because what that actually means is we're not going to ban cards, we're not going to suspend cards, we're going to adjust them to make them playable. Some people will like it. Personally, I think it's good. If I buy a card, I know I'm already buying into it. I bought it. Do I expect it to always stay the same? Yeah, kind of. But if they do tweak it because it is too powerful and it's for the sake of the health of the game, I think I'm fine with that personally. Some people are going to die on that hill. They're going to be super against that idea. And I totally understand that. If you buy XYZ card for 1 wild card or 4 wild cards, you buy your playset, you expect that card to always be the same. And banning it, yes, they banned it, but you still at least got those 4 wild cards back. However, there are ramifications on the rest of the deck. That's a whole nother issue. But now if they just nerf it into an unplayable state, that's actually going to be worse than banning it because you're going to be left with a useless card now and no wild cards to boot. And it might affect the deck that you were playing. That's going to upset a lot of people. I think a lot of people are not going to be able to accept that overall in the historic player base. As far as standard players go, whatever, they probably don't care because you can just play the standard paper format or the Alchemy format, whatever one you choose. But for historic, we're kind of honed in on this. We don't have a choice. We are only playing live stuff now, and people, yeah, I can see this one being very controversial. Me, I'm fine. Maybe I'm too laid back for it, but like I said at the start of the video, I expected this from historic. I expected bans. I expected rebalances. So I'm kind of I've coped with it, I guess, or come to terms with it. Whereas others, I could see this making people leave the game. Absolutely.
When improving or making cards worse, this is for Dave, I think. What formats are you considering? And does how good a card is in Historic Brawl matter if they are legal there as well?
I mean, we try to take into account all the formats as much as we can. I mean, again, you were referring to the FFL testing. The FFL testing was focused on Alchemy, especially since that's the new thing here. So, you know, much like paper, like a lot of our FFL testing focuses on standard. Here, much of our testing as it relates to, you know, the new content was focused on Alchemy itself. But, you know, so that's not to say, like, a lot of the rebalancing, we're certainly considering historic. Every change we're making, we're considering historic, and we're also considering historic brawl. Again, just in terms of, like, you know, how much expertise any of the individuals working on that have with those formats is going to vary a lot to a lot. But we do try to ask people around the teams, like, if they have any input or concerns on any of these changes for all the various formats.
See, that right there kind of means not really. We ask for input if they have ideas on the various formats. Yeah, that doesn't mean that they're playtesting historic or historic brawl. They're taking a cursory glance at the new card or the card changes, and with the information that they may or may not have of the format, they're going, yeah, maybe, or it might be fine, or this could be a problem with this, but they're not actually playtesting anything by the sounds of that answer, in my opinion, which is really bad. Historic is awesome. They need to put a lot more resources and time into historic and be a lot more careful with it. But it sounds to me from a lot of this, just the overall feeling I'm getting, it's Alchemy first. It's Wizards pushing standard. Of course, they want to push standard because eternal formats are not going to be as profitable for them. And yeah, maybe they're a little bit too financially focused instead of, you know, focused on creating a good overall gaming environment. I don't like that answer. And that's one big concern I do have. I am worried that they are going to be a little heavy-handed with some of the changes that they make to cards, the buffs and nerfs, and not take into consideration the ramifications that could come out of those rebalances on specifically Brawl. Or not Brawl, sorry, Historic. A deck in Historic being sideswiped by a change for Alchemy that, yeah, it benefits that format to a degree, but it's going to completely derail something in Historic. I really worry about how much effort they're putting into and care they're putting into changes that will come in the future. That's a huge concern I have.
I want to acknowledge a whole string of questions that are about economy questions. Economy is not exactly Ian's area, so we're not going to dive into it today because he wasn't sure on the price of booster packs and that sort of thing. So I don't want to put Ian on the spot and ask him a bunch of economy questions. We definitely recognize those are important to all of you, and I personally owe you all a show where we do talk about the arena economy as a whole. That is not this show, but I do want to acknowledge, for example, the user Brain Pry asked a really good question about the economy and pressures on wild cards and that sort of thing. They're good questions. We just don't have anyone on the show today that has that area of expertise to really dive into that, but we do owe you a show on that topic.
Wow, what a non-answer that was. Good job, Blake. Yeah, that show's not coming. Not anytime soon.
Dave, are you going to use rebalancing cards to nerf decks instead of banning them at a BNR for formats like Historic?
For historic, yes, I think we would very much try to rebalance stuff instead of banning stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Not sure if that format's trying to get at other stuff, right? I think I mean, in terms of paper formats, I mean, we're gonna make the best decisions for paper formats that we think are the best decisions for paper formats, kind of regardless of what we're doing here. I mean, I on the bright side, I think Alchemy does, right? We get to see what happens with some of these changes in Alchemy. We get to see, like, if a card's been nerfed, we get to learn from Alchemy what the format might look like more with that card not in the environment. Does that look better? It might help us inform our BNR decisions, but we're still gonna make the decisions that are best for tabletop, you know, based on the tabletop format.
I'm starting to get the feeling that the rebalancing thing isn't going to be something that they're going to put a lot of effort into. This is just a quick thought that just suddenly came to me. I feel like what's actually happening here with Alchemy is just Wizards of the Coast selling us mini expansion packs 4 times a year because they just wanted more products. Oh man, it just suddenly like boom. I feel like that's what it is. Why put all? They're not gonna. Alchemy's not going to change because of the rebalance cards that much. Alchemy's going to change significantly because of the 63 or the 30 some cards that they're going to be putting into the format every time a new set comes out. That's what's going to distinguish these things, because these cards are always going to be pushed. They're going to be way overtuned, I think, and format defining. Esika's Chariot being changed, or Luminarch Aspirant having a tweak to it, that's not going to change the format. Putting in the Patient Zero zombie is going to change the format significantly. So that's what's happening here. We just have to buy the expansion pack now. We have to buy the main set 4 times a year and the expansion packs now for each of those sets. Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
Let's see. All right, we're going to end on this question because I think it's a good question. This is probably mostly for Dave. Dave, what can you say to people who think Wizards will now design broken cards on purpose with the "we can always balance them later" mentality?
I mean, I can tell you as a designer, like there's no pride to be taken in designing a card that's breaking the format, right? There's having unhealthy formats it isn't helping our bottom line, I don't think, in any sort of way. I mean, I know some people feel otherwise, right? Like, we're trying to get cards to the right spot. Part of our job is to take risks. Part of our job is to what's going to get this to kind of just the right spot where it shows up. A lot of cards we make just don't show up at all, even though we think they are. To the question, yes, we can. If we make a mistake, we can fix it later. Certainly, that can be a philosophy. But I certainly don't feel like anyone's trying to go overboard on stuff. We're trying to take our best educated guesses at how the card should be accurately costed. I mean, we want our formats to be fun more than anything. We don't, right? Like, we want to push the cards that we think are fun. But I don't think just because we're kind of living in this new digital world of, what is digital magic again? Yeah, like I don't think we want to be taking particularly bigger risks anyways. And I think, right, like there's still a cost of any time we're changing a card, and we still want to be as responsible as we can, and having the card come out at the right spot, and people, right, we don't want people to have to rebuild their decks or tear apart a deck that they built because some card was costed incorrectly by us. That's certainly not where I'm coming from, and there's not pressure from other people to do that upon me.
I believe that. I think that's a genuine answer from him, and yeah, I think he's being authentic with everything that he said. They want to have a healthy format, especially as a designer. But I also think that they are still financially motivated with a lot of things. They're not going to print obviously broken cards to ruin the format or to change the format in such a dramatic way to sell packs. They're just going to keep giving us more and more and more packs to buy with cards that are somewhat pushed and very playable. And that's how they're going to keep driving their own economy. And it's just going to fatigue us. It's just going to be too much for the average player. Not everybody is going to be willing to put $100 or $150 into Magic Arena every month. Magic players spend a lot of money on Magic. It's pretty obvious, especially if you're a paper player. A lot of people buy a box when it comes out. When I buy a box, it's about $140 or so. And that's an okay fee. Plus you pay for the pre-release. You're in for like $200 every 3 months. Well, they want to update that or up that to, how about like every month and a half or every month? Let's try to get $100 out of you. That's what they're going to start doing. It's not that they're going to break cards on purpose and rebalance them later. They're just going to flood us with products. And that is not the way to go about making a long-lasting game. That's very worrisome if that is actually the future plan for the game's financial interests. All right, so they got to the end of their thing. They did a little bit of a wrap up. I'm going to cut most of that. Most of the questions from the Q&A were not really important. I'm going to put in only the ones that were pertinent to Historic. Overall, I think this announcement is going to be positive. There are concerns, of course, but I'm pretty excited to see some of the changes and what that could lead to the future. I do like having new cards injected into the format. I, as a person that plays a lot of different decks, do feel like I craft a lot of the cards that are put out, and that's a little bit of a concern if they keep putting out too many products. I've been talking about this a lot at the end of this video. Products. If it's too much, it's going to be hard to keep up with, and it's going to push a lot of players away. Hopefully they ease their role a little bit. Maybe they change the way they release Alchemy, but I really doubt it. I think that 30 days later is going to be pretty much set in stone, and that's just something we're going to have to deal with. Maybe what's going to end up happening, at least from my point of view, if a new set comes out like Kamigawa in February, early February, I believe, I might just not get it right off the bat. I might hold off for 30 days and just wait for the Alchemy release and then kind of go in there before Alchemy releases. You know, you play Brawl, you play something else. Historic's going to be what it is. Maybe a few cards from the new set are going to shake up things. But I think for the most part, Historic, the big ones, the big 5, the big 10 decks, they're going to be the ones that are ruling the format and determining the meta. And you don't really need to rush out and get all the new packs right away. That might be how things kind of boil down in the end. As far as the balances and nerfs and buffs go, I welcome them for now. I'm optimistic about how they will handle it. I'm hopeful that they won't, steamroll the format and ruin some cards. I don't think they're that irresponsible. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but I am a little bit worried that some of the Alchemy cards might be a little bit too pushed. That'll be something to be determined later on. Anyways, that is the announcement. It was super long. I'm hopeful that I'm able to cut it down to a more digestible viewing length, but I think there's going to be a lot. It's going to be a pretty long video overall because it was a big announcement. Lots of things were said in it, and I'm just going to do my best to cut out all the fat. If you're still here at the end of this video, however long it is, it's 2 hours on my recording. Hopefully I can get it under an hour and a bit. Thanks for watching. I hope watching this was helpful, and I hope some of my comments on what is coming for MTG Arena were, somewhat interesting to listen to. Let me know what you think about these changes. Are you upset about Alchemy? Are you furious that they're going to be changing Historic because they want to balance standard cards? I don't know. Let me know. I'd be interested to hear what you think. So drop a comment down below, of course, and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching the video. Take care for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.